The store manager didn't ask questions. He pointed at Naomi, a 17-year-old honor student, and accused her of stealing right there in front of everyone. No proof, no reason, just her skin and the backpack she hadn't even bought yet. Minutes later, she was in handcuffs, surrounded by silence, judged before anyone heard her speak. And when she stood in court, the judge didn't look her in the eye, didn't ask about the surveillance footage, just raised the charge to felony theft and moved on. Why would a courtroom ignore the truth when it's right there on camera? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this makes you think, and don't forget to subscribe. Now let's go back to where it all began. Naomi Brooks had always played by the rules. 17 years old, top of her class, and freshly accepted into UCLA's pre-law program, she was the kind of student teachers bragged about. Sharp, focused, unshakably kind. Her guidance counselor once called her the gold standard, not just for Black students, but for any student with a dream and the discipline to chase it. That Saturday morning, the house smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent. Naomi's mother had woken early to bake, and her father sat at the kitchen table grading papers with a red pen, humming quietly. They didn't have much, but they made it work. Two public school teachers in Tempe, Arizona, who believed in books, bedtime prayers, and standing tall no matter what. Naomi walked into the kitchen already dressed, her curls pulled back into a neat ponytail. She slung her frayed backpack over one shoulder. It had barely survived junior year, and kissed her mom on the cheek. "I'm heading out," she said. "I need a new one before finals start." "Don't spend a fortune," her mother replied with a smile. "You're not buying a suitcase, just something to hold your dreams together." Naomi laughed, grabbing the keys. She didn't tell them how nervous she was about everything lately. The pressure, the expectations, the fear that one misstep could undo years of hard work. She didn't need to. Her parents knew, and they believed in her. The store she picked wasn't fancy. Budget Mart stood between a pawn shop and a payday loan place, but it was close, and she'd been there before. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, kids ran wild in the aisles, and someone yelled for a price check every 5 minutes. Naomi found what she needed quickly: a plain navy blue backpack with strong zippers and enough compartments to organize a war. She clutched it in one hand, her phone in the other, and stood in line, scrolling through her texts. She didn't see him coming. A man in a red polo shirt, mid-30s, thin beard, clipboard in hand, tapped her shoulder with 2 fingers. "You need to come with me," he said, nodding toward the back of the store. Naomi blinked, confused. "What? Won't?" "Someone reported you," he said flatly. "They saw you putting merchandise in your bag." Her heart stalled. I haven't even," but he was already walking. A few customers nearby turned to watch, some with curiosity, some with judgment. Naomi stood frozen for half a second, then followed him. The office in the back was barely larger than a janitor's closet. The man pointed to a metal chair. "Sit. Empty your pockets and the bag." "I haven't paid for it yet," Naomi said, her voice trembling. "But I haven't taken anything else." "Policy," he muttered. "We have to check." She opened the backpack, still tagged untouched, and placed it on the table beside her phone, lip balm, and wallet. Nothing more, nothing hidden, nothing stolen. He looked disappointed. For a moment, Naomi thought it might be over. A misunderstanding. A quiet apology. Maybe he'd offer her a discount to make up for it. Instead, he picked up the phone. "I have a shoplifter," he said. "Yes. Black female, mid to late teens. Send someone." Naomi stared at him, her stomach hollowing out. "You're calling the police. It's company policy." "I didn't take anything." He didn't answer. When the officer arrived, he was polite, calm. He even apologized as he cuffed her wrist behind her back. Said he had to follow procedure. Said it wasn't personal. Naomi walked through the store a second time, this time in handcuffs. Heads turned. Phones came out. No one asked her name. No one asked her story. Outside, the heat pressed down like punishment. She was placed in the back of the cruiser, the door slammed shut beside her. She stared at her reflection in the partition glass, unable to cry. It didn't feel real. It felt like something that happened to other kids. Kids who got caught, who messed up, who deserved it. But she wasn't one of them. She had done everything right. And still, somehow this was happening. At the precinct, the fluorescent lights felt colder, harsher. Naomi sat on a metal bench, hands cuffed in front of her, now wrists still red from the ride over. No one spoke to her beyond clipped instructions. A clipboard here, a fingerprint scan there. The officer who'd brought her in had changed. Less polite now, quieter, less eye contact. Like her presence was an inconvenience, not a human being needing answers, but a name to process. She tried to speak. "I didn't steal anything," she said. He didn't look up. "Tell it to the judge." "But there's video." There has to be. Miss, he said dryly, you have the right to remain silent. Use it. They took her picture, gave her a plastic-wrapped sandwich she couldn't eat, ran her name through a system that had never met her but already had a slot for her. By the time they handed her a charge sheet, misdemeanor theft shoplifting, under $500, her hands were shaking too hard to hold the paper. Her court date was set for 3 weeks later. No public defender yet. No explanation of what came next. Just a paper, a number, and a quiet ushering toward the lobby. Her father was already outside pacing beneath a flickering streetlight, jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. When Naomi stepped through the doors, he rushed forward, but paused, staring at the cuffs that had just been removed, at the smudged ink on her fingers. Baby, he whispered. She tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. They didn't speak in the car. Naomi stared out the window the whole ride home, replaying the moment in the store again and again. What had she done differently? What could she have said? How could it all fall apart that fast? When they pulled into the driveway, her mother was waiting on the porch. She rushed forward, hugging Naomi so tightly it hurt. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Did they? Naomi nodded numbly. I'm fine, Mom. But she wasn't. Not inside. That night, Naomi lay in bed staring at the ceiling, still fully dressed, her old backpack tossed on the floor like a ghost of who she used to be. She didn't cry until the house went quiet. Then she let it happen. Slow, silent sobs pressed into her pillow, shaking her shoulders. She cried for her scholarship, for the letters of recommendation she had lined up, for the phone calls she knew would come once word got around, for the doubt she could already hear in people's voices. She seemed like a good kid. Well, you never really know anyone, do you? She buried her face deeper into the pillow. She didn't want to wake her parents, didn't want them to see her broken like this. But in the morning they knew. Over breakfast, her mother moved slowly, stirring oatmeal that no one would eat. Her father sat at the table, eyes fixed on the folded police report in his hand. The air was too still. She needs a lawyer, her dad said finally. Someone who actually fights. We're not letting this sit. Her mother didn't answer at first. Then quietly, what we need to do is protect her. By doing what? Saying nothing. Letting them slap a record on our daughter like she's disposable. Shouting won't help her either. I'm not shouting. You're angry, and you're scared. I'm her mother, and I'm her father. Their voices rose, then fell just as quickly. Naomi sat at the counter, not saying a word, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. She felt invisible, like the room was spinning and she was just stuck in the center of it, watching them argue over her, not with her. She was the one arrested, the one shamed, the one who couldn't even sleep without feeling the weight of the cuffs on her skin. But somehow her voice wasn't in the conversation. That more than anything made her feel alone. Later that afternoon, Naomi opened her college acceptance letter again, the edges worn soft from how many times she had reread it in better days. Her name was still there, bold at the top, but now it looked like it belonged to someone else. Naomi hadn't slept the night before her hearing. She had ironed her best dress navy blue with a modest neckline and printed every document her guidance counselor had ever written for her. Transcripts, recommendation letters, awards, proof that she wasn't a criminal, that she didn't belong in this building where everyone looked tired and no one made eye contact. The Maricopa County Courthouse was colder than she expected. Not just the temperature, but the way people moved fast and distracted, like justice was just another task to check off before lunch. She sat beside her court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Halverson, a balding man with a tired smile and a coffee stain on his tie. He greeted her politely, nodded at the folder she clutched to her chest. "We'll get through this," he said. "Just stay calm, answer what's asked. Don't make waves." She wanted to believe him. She really did. When they called her name, Naomi Brooks, case number 68321, the blood drained from her face. Her father squeezed her hand. Her mother whispered a prayer. Naomi stood, legs trembling, and walked toward the defense table. Halverson followed, shuffling papers. Then the judge entered. Eleanor Vance. Black robe, high cheekbones, eyes like cold glass. She didn't smile, didn't look up, didn't even glance at Naomi. What she did do was flip open a file, one single police report, and read for exactly 20 seconds before leaning back in her chair with a sigh. "Miss Brooks," she said, her voice clipped, almost bored. "You're pleading not guilty." "Yes, Your Honor," Naomi said, her voice clear, though her knees felt like they might buckle. Mr. Halverson cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the defense has brought several character references and academic records that speak to my client's integrity. We also request access to the store's security footage, which..." "The motion is denied," Judge Vance interrupted without looking up. "This court finds sufficient cause to proceed based on the officer's report." Halverson blinked, But Your Honor, the footage. I said denied counsel. Naomi stared at her attorney, waiting for him to push harder. Say something stronger. Demand to be heard. But he only adjusted his glasses and murmured, noted. That was it. The courtroom might as well have gone silent. Naomi opened her mouth, ready to speak for herself, but Judge Vance didn't give her the chance. This is not a discussion, Miss Brooks. You've entered your plea. We will schedule a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. Then she turned to the prosecutor, a young woman with a sleek ponytail and a folder filled with neatly clipped papers. Do you wish to amend the charges? The prosecutor didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor. Based on new information and the perceived intent of the accused, the state moves to elevate the charge to grand theft. Naomi's head snapped up. What? Halverson stood. Objection, Your Honor. That's absurd. The value of the item. Enough, Judge Vance barked. This court will let a jury decide. The room pulsed with quiet shock. Naomi looked to the gallery where her parents sat frozen. Her mother had her hand pressed to her lips. Her father's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The judge continued without pause. Bail is set at $5,000. Defendant is to return for pretrial in 3 weeks. She struck the gavel once. Done. Just like that. Naomi's legs barely moved as she followed Halverson out of the courtroom. He muttered something about filing a motion to reconsider, but it sounded like smoke empty, fading before it reached her ears. Her world was unraveling. She didn't feel angry yet, or sad, or even afraid. Just numb. The kind of numb that sinks into your bones, makes you question if you were ever real to begin with. They hadn't seen her that day. Not really. Not the honor student. Not the daughter who stayed up late helping her mom grade papers. Not the girl who wanted to become a lawyer because she believed in justice. No, to them, she was just a file folder, a face on a page, and maybe that's all she'd ever be. The cafeteria inside the courthouse smelled like burned coffee and cold fries. Naomi sat at a corner table, her court papers stacked neatly in front of her like a barricade. She hadn't touched her food. Her stomach felt like it had shrunk to nothing. Across from her, her mother stirred a cup of tea, not drinking it. Her father scrolled through his phone, his jaw tight, his thumb still. For a few long minutes, nobody said a word. Then her father spoke. We're not letting this stand, he said, voice low but firm. We get a real attorney. We go public if we have to. This whole thing stinks. Her mother's hand twitched. She looked up sharply. And what invite reporters to chase her around school, make her the face of some protest headline. She's 17. Harold, not a martyr. She's also not a criminal, he snapped back. You saw what that judge did. Didn't even look at her. They're railroading our daughter, and we're supposed to stay quiet. I'm saying we protect her. So am I, just not by pretending this didn't happen. Their voices stayed low, but the emotion behind them wasn't quiet at all. Naomi sat between them, shrinking inward. She didn't want to be anyone's symbol. She didn't want news cameras or press conferences. She just wanted her life back. But what if silence was worse? What if staying quiet meant letting them win? She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't spoken to Marcus in almost 2 weeks. Not because anything was wrong. He was just always busy, buried in D.C., politics, court filings, endless meetings with people in suits who called him General Brooks. But right now, she didn't need the version of him who worked behind a podium. She needed her brother. She opened their old thread. Naomi. It happened. They bumped the charge. The judge won't even look at the footage. She hit send, then hesitated, then added, I don't know what to do. The message hung there on the screen, blinking like a wound. She locked the phone, took a breath, let it sit in silence. A minute passed. Then the screen lit up. Marcus, stay right there. I'm coming. That was it. 5 words, no punctuation, no delay. Naomi stared at it. For a second, she didn't know what to feel. Relief hit first, but not like a wave, more like a slow warmth spreading in her chest. Then came the disbelief. The tension that had been coiled in her spine for days started to loosen just a little. She didn't know what Marcus could do, didn't know what it meant for him to come, but someone believed her. Not just anyone, someone who had power. And he wasn't asking questions. He was moving. Her mom noticed her expression and leaned over. Who was that? Naomi hesitated. Marcus. Her mother's brow furrowed. You told him? I needed to. Her mom's eyes darted around the room like reporters might burst through the walls any minute. Naomi, you don't know what that could mean. He has a public image. You don't want to become... I already am, Naomi said quietly. Her father looked at her, then really looked. What did he say? Naomi turned the phone so he could read the screen. He nodded once. Good. Her mother didn't speak. She stared down at her tea and said nothing. But Naomi didn't feel like a child anymore. Not today. She sat back in her chair, closed her eyes for a moment. The courthouse still buzzed around her lawyers, chatting guards shuffling past, voices echoing down halls. But inside her, something had shifted. For days, she had been shrinking, dimming, silencing herself. Now someone had lit a fuse, and whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. In Washington, D.C., it was raining. Marcus Brooks stood by his office window watching gray streaks blur the Capitol dome. His phone buzzed again, but he ignored it. His eyes were fixed on a single text, the one Naomi had sent just 20 minutes earlier. It happened. They bumped the charge. The judge won't even look at the footage. I don't know what to do. That last line hit him in the chest harder than anything he'd read in years. He didn't pace, he didn't panic. He moved with purpose. By the time his assistant poked her head in to ask about a briefing with the Attorney General's task force, Marcus was already rolling up his sleeves and dialing a number from memory. The line rang once, then twice. Then, Ross, Caleb, I need you in Arizona. There was a pause, then Naomi, she's being railroaded. Judge won't look at evidence. Public defender's asleep at the wheel. They just upped the charge to grand theft. Jesus, Caleb muttered. You want me to file? I want you to dig, Marcus said. Everything on Judge Eleanor Vance. Ruling, sanctions, complaints, especially ones that got buried. And get the store footage. If there's a copy, I want it pulled before they lose it. I'll need access. You'll have it. Badge clearance, whatever you need. Caleb didn't ask for more details. He never did. I'll be on the next flight. Back at the courthouse cafeteria, Naomi sat at the same table. Her mother had stepped outside to take a phone call. Her father had gone to check on the car. For a brief moment, she was alone. Until a man in a tailored navy blue suit appeared beside her table. Miss Brooks. Naomi looked up. He was in his early 40s, clean-shaven, sharp features, calm eyes. He didn't look like the other attorneys. He looked like he didn't waste time. Yes, he flashed a federal ID so quickly she barely registered the details. I'm Caleb Ross. Marcus sent me. Her breath caught. He sat without asking, opened a notebook, and pulled out a pen. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. She did. The store, the accusation, the backroom search, the cuffs, the booking, the courtroom that never gave her a chance. Caleb didn't interrupt, didn't take his eyes off her. He just wrote. His handwriting was quick, neat, methodical. Her parents returned mid-conversation. Her father sat down silently. Her mother hovered hesitant, but they stayed. When Naomi finished, Caleb leaned back. All right, he said. Here's what's happening. Marcus is pulling Judge Vance's federal history as we speak. I'll file an emergency motion for surveillance footage if it hasn't already been wiped. And if there's even a whisper of misconduct in her record, we'll blow it open. Naomi blinked. What if none of it works? Caleb's voice didn't change, but the weight in it did. It'll work, he said. You're not invisible anymore. That's what they count on, people like you staying quiet, hoping it passes. But not this time. 20 minutes later, he was gone. But Naomi sat in silence long after staring at the space he just occupied. Something in her had shifted. Not like before when she thought hope meant maybe someone would hear her. This time hope came with a plan, with action, with someone who knew how to fight inside the system that had tried to bury her. In Washington, Marcus stared out his window as the rain finally slowed. His desk phone blinked red with missed calls. He didn't care. He pulled up the case history of Judge Eleanor Vance and started reading. The courthouse hadn't changed. Same beige walls, same flickering lights, same indifferent rhythm of voices and footsteps echoing off linoleum floors. But something was different now. The air was heavier, tighter, tense. It started with the flash of cameras outside. Reporters pressed against the sidewalk barricades, microphones raised. Then came the low thrum of a black SUV pulling up to the front steps. It wasn't marked. No security detail. Just one man stepping out, sleeves rolled, no tie expression, like carved granite. Marcus Brooks didn't need a badge. His presence alone said everything. He walked through the courthouse doors without slowing. Clerks stopped whispering. Bailiffs straightened their posture. Even the security guard at the checkpoint lowered his voice to a near whisper as he waved him through. Marcus didn't speak to anyone on the way in. He didn't have to. His name had already arrived before he did. Naomi sat in the courtroom 3B next to Caleb, trying to keep her hands from shaking. She hadn't been told Marcus was coming in person. When the back doors opened and he stepped inside, heads turned as if gravity had shifted. It wasn't about who he was, it was what he represented. Power that couldn't be ignored. Judge Eleanor Vance looked up just as Marcus entered. Her mouth tightened, her hand froze on her gavel. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not like this. Marcus didn't take a seat. He walked straight to the center of the room. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "my name is Marcus Brooks, representing the Department of Justice." Silence dropped like a curtain. "We are opening an investigation into patterns of systemic judicial misconduct in this courtroom." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Judge Vance stood slowly. Her voice tried to stay sharp. "Mr. Brooks, this is highly irregular, and so is ignoring constitutional rights." Marcus said, still composed, still steady, "We have documented complaints, sealed settlements, and a consistent pattern of disregard for due process under your rulings. Effective immediately, we are reviewing every case you've handled in the past 5 years." She tried to interrupt again, but the room wasn't listening to her anymore. Reporters began scribbling notes. A court clerk whispered into a phone. One of the prosecutors stood frozen with a file halfway open in her hand. Naomi could hardly breathe. It didn't feel real. It felt like watching the tide turn after weeks of drowning. Judge Vance gripped the bench, still trying to reassert control. "This is not a platform for spectacle." Marcus stepped closer, not threatening, just undeniable. "With all due respect, Your Honor, when justice is mishandled, silence is no longer an option. You have the right to respond. You do not have the right to operate unchecked." She opened her mouth to protest but paused, because even she could see it now. She'd lost the room. The bailiff glanced her way uneasy. Her clerk no longer made eye contact. Even the assistant prosecutor took a step back. Vance's shoulders stiffened, but her voice lost its edge. "This court moves to dismiss the case of Naomi Brooks without prejudice." No cheers, no applause, just stunned silence. And then, a sound, a single exhale from Naomi's chest, quiet but full. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink for a moment. She had waited so long to hear those words. Dismissed, free. Beside her, Caleb leaned over and whispered, "That's your win right there." She nodded barely. Her father's hand gripped her shoulder from behind. Her mother whispered something she couldn't even hear. But it didn't matter. She was standing. She was still standing. Marcus didn't stay. He turned and walked out of the courtroom with the same quiet authority he had arrived with. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. He didn't respond. Inside, Judge Vance sat back down. But the courtroom wasn't hers anymore. And she knew it. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one holding the gavel. Justice had entered the room. And it had a name. 9 days. That's how long it took for Judge Eleanor Vance to go from the highest seat in the courtroom to a name scrolling across the bottom of every news channel in the country. 9 days of mounting pressure, of files being pulled, of sealed settlements being reopened, of whispers turning into headlines. The official statement from the Judiciary Board came quietly on a Monday morning. Judge Vance has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a full investigation. By the end of the week, she stood at a podium outside her home, flanked by 2 attorneys in a tightly written speech. She didn't apologize. She didn't admit fault. She called it a witch hunt. A political hit job, she said, her voice sharp, unwavering. "I've served this court for over 20 years. What's happening here isn't about justice. It's about appeasing the public and punishing strength." Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. But Vance didn't answer them. She turned and walked back into her house, leaving a country still deciding what to make of her. But outside that front door, everything had already started to change. It began with names. One by one, people came forward, former defendants, public defenders, family members of the wrongfully convicted. They brought receipts, case numbers, rulings, stories that sounded all too familiar. A 16-year-old Latino boy accused of breaking into a car, even after security footage showed he was across town. A single black mother charged with resisting arrest for asking why she was pulled over. A Navy veteran denied bail on a first-time offense, while white defendants with worse records walked free the same day. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns that had been ignored, excused, and buried under bureaucratic language for years, until Naomi's case cracked them open. The media didn't hold back. Evening news segments ran interviews with former clerks who admitted they'd seen the bias but felt powerless. Investigative journalists uncovered internal memos about complaints against Vance that had mysteriously disappeared. A leaked email showed a prosecutor expressing concern about her disproportionate treatment of black teens and being told to watch her tone. The silence that had protected Vance for years was broken, and the sound of it collapsing echoed far beyond Tempe. In Phoenix, the state's Chief Justice held a televised address announcing a top-down review of every courtroom in Maricopa County. A judicial task force was assembled, including civil rights attorneys, former public defenders, and retired judges from outside the system. We failed, he said plainly. We failed to notice. We failed to act. That ends now. Within weeks, sweeping changes were announced. Mandatory racial bias training for all sitting judges, transparent public complaint review boards, state funding for independent courtroom monitors, and perhaps most importantly, a new law requiring that all security footage related to criminal charges be submitted for review by both prosecution and defense, no exceptions. The reforms were real, tangible, and long overdue. Marcus Brooks spoke once at a press conference held by the Department of Justice. He didn't gloat, he didn't point fingers. He only said justice shouldn't depend on who's watching, but sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to put a spotlight on it. Naomi watched the news quietly from the couch at home, knees tucked under her, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her parents sat beside her, one on each side, still trying to process everything that had happened. She hadn't asked for any of it. Not the cameras, not the headlines, not the weight of other people's pain landing on her shoulders. But deep down, she understood why it mattered. Her case had started something, and this time the system was the one on trial. The first time Naomi spoke in front of a crowd after the trial, her voice trembled. It wasn't a courtroom this time. It wasn't cold or quiet or lined with walls that made her feel small. It was a high school gymnasium in South Phoenix. The folding chair squeaked. The microphone buzzed before someone tapped it twice and handed it to her. There were about 50 students in the room, most of them Black or Latino, most of them sitting with their arms crossed, eyes half curious, half exhausted. Like they'd heard too many speeches that didn't matter. Naomi didn't give them a speech. She told them the truth. She told them about the day she got arrested for something she didn't do, about how the judge never looked at her, about what it felt like to be handcuffed and humiliated, knowing you'd done everything right and still got treated like you didn't matter. She told them about the silence and what it took to break it. Some of the kids nodded, a few leaned forward. Most just watched her, not blinking. Afterward, when the principal opened the floor for questions, a few hands went up. One boy asked if she still wanted to be a lawyer. She smiled and said yes, now more than ever. Another asked if she thought things had really changed. She didn't lie. Some things have, she said, but we've still got a long way to go. At the end, as the students filtered out, a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, too young to be in the room, but clinging to her older sister's arm, walked up to Naomi slowly. Her hair was pulled back in tight braids and her eyes were wide. She whispered, "Oh, were you scared?" Naomi bent down so they were eye to eye. "I was terrified," she said softly, "but I spoke up anyway. And you can too." The girl nodded once, then wrapped her arms around Naomi's waist. Naomi hugged her back, holding the moment with both arms. She didn't need applause. She needed that hug. That was what it was about now. Not headlines, not interviews, but connection. One voice meeting another, one story helping someone else find theirs. In the weeks that followed, Naomi visited more schools. Some big, some small. Sometimes she spoke in classrooms, other times in auditoriums. She never used notes. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just showed up and told the truth. And kids listened, not because she was perfect, but because she had survived something that nearly erased her and chose not to disappear. Word spread. Teachers began inviting her to speak at justice reform panels. Community leaders asked her to join forums on youth advocacy. Parents came to her quietly asking for advice on how to help their own children. Naomi always made time. Meanwhile, Marcus had been working behind the scenes. A month after the charges were dismissed, he announced the launch of the Brooks Justice Fund, a scholarship and legal aid foundation for students of color facing wrongful charges. At the press conference, he stepped aside and handed the podium to Naomi. She didn't speak for long, just long enough. She thanked the donors, thanked her parents, thanked every kid who had told her they saw themselves in her story. And then she said this: "Every system that fails, fails because too many people look away. But every change we make starts when one person decides not to stay silent. That person doesn't have to be powerful. They just have to be brave." She didn't cry, but her mother did. Her father too. Later, as cameras packed up and people filtered out, Marcus walked over and handed Naomi a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Open it later." She did. That night, inside was a handwritten letter. Just 2 lines. "You didn't just survive. You sparked something. Keep going. M." She folded the letter and placed it in the back of her notebook. It stayed with her, wherever she went. The sun was just beginning to slip beneath the horizon when Naomi found her spot on the beach. It was quiet along this stretch of Santa Monica. Just a few joggers, a couple walking their dog, and the distant sound of gulls circling overhead. She kicked off her shoes and sat in the cool sand, pulling her knees to her chest. Her admissions packet from UCLA was tucked in her backpack behind her, along with a small stack of letters from students who had written to her over the past month. She had made it. Tomorrow, she'd move into her dorm. A new chapter, a new start. But tonight wasn't about beginnings. Tonight was about something else. Closure. Naomi pulled out her phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, then scrolled to a number she had saved but never used. She tapped it once, held the phone to her ear, and waited. It rang 3 times. Then a voice, guarded and low. Hello. Naomi took a breath. It's Naomi Brooks. Silence. Then a faint exhale. You shouldn't be calling this number. I won't take long. More silence. Then what do you want? Naomi's voice stayed calm, steady. I just wanted you to hear it from me. She paused. Let the waves crash in the background. You lost. Not because you were wrong, though you were, but because we stopped being quiet. Judge Vance didn't respond right away. Naomi could hear the faint hum of static on the line. Then the former judge's voice returned, rough, almost bitter. The world's not fair, girl. It never has been. Naomi looked out toward the water, the sky now streaked in deep orange and purple. I know, she said quietly. That's why I'm still standing. There was nothing left to say. She ended the call. No drama, no parting words, just a click and a hush. She let the phone drop into her bag, then stood slowly. Her bare feet sank slightly into the sand as she walked toward the ocean. The first wave that touched her toes was cold, but she didn't flinch. She stepped forward again and again, until the water came up to her ankles. The breeze caught the edges of her dress, lifted her curls gently off her shoulders. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it all wash over her. The months of fear, the courtroom glares, the steel of the handcuffs, the helplessness that once sat in her throat like stone. All of it had brought her here, and she had survived it. Not untouched, but unbroken. She opened her eyes and looked out across the waves. This fight had never been just hers. It belonged to every student who had been overlooked, every child who had been silenced before they even understood what it meant to speak, every parent who had begged the world to see their kid as more than a statistic. Naomi hadn't asked to become a symbol, but she had become a voice, and now she would never give it back. Behind her, the beach slowly dimmed with the fading light. Ahead, the ocean stretched wan and endless. She took one final step forward and let the water rush up over her feet, cold and grounding. She smiled, small but real, then turned and walked back toward shore, each footprint a quiet mark left behind, soon to be taken by the tide. But her story, that would remain, not as a headline, not as a warning, but as a beginning for someone else. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on what Naomi's journey truly showed us, that silence protects injustice, but one voice, when it dares to rise, can shake an entire system. Her courage didn't just clear her name, it opened doors for others who had been overlooked, dismissed, or forgotten. At Mr. Max Stories, we share stories like this to remind each other that truth matters, that justice is worth fighting for, and that even the quietest voice can make a difference when it chooses not to stay silent. If you found meaning in this story, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Your support helps us keep creating powerful human stories that speak to the heart, and we couldn't do it without you. Thank you for being part of this community.